Hey, what's up guys? Alex here with a new video, and today we have a very fun comparison. We will be looking at all of Leica's 50mm SL lenses. So here in front of me I have the Summilux SL, the Apo SL, and the new Summicron SL. And I don't think there's a comparison like this on YouTube. I'm super excited to show you the images and the differences because each one of these lenses brings something different to the table, and I was actually very surprised when I was looking at the results. But for today's video, we will be looking at a few things: build quality and weight, autofocus, and of course, image quality. Like I do with all my videos, I will be providing image samples for you to download and play with yourself. So every image you see in this comparison, you can download and you can do the exact same comparison yourself to see if you have different opinions and results, because obviously what you see on YouTube will be compressed and look slightly different. Enough of me talking, let's go ahead and get to this comparison. We'll actually start off by talking about price, because we have three different lenses and three different price points. So the Summilux SL here in front of me in the middle retails for $65.95, and it is the most expensive lens out of the bunch. It is also the only f1.4 lens Leica builds for their SL lineup. Here on my right, we have the Apo, and this lens retails for $5,095. This is part of their Apo lineup, and of course, Leica has a wide variety of different focal lengths in this lineup. And then we have the newest 50 Summicron SL, which retails for $1895, part of their budget lineup. And it's not budget lens for any system, but as you can see in the Leica system, this is a big budget lens. So those are the price points. Let's go ahead and get to build quality and weight. And you'll see why weight in this comparison matters. But build quality, every single one of these lenses, including the budget 50 Summicron, is made out of metal, and they all have the same design language, which means they are all weather sealed. None of them have any switches or buttons, and Leica does this to, again, have really good weather sealing with these lenses. And they all feel the same. So metal housing, rubber focusing ring, they feel solid, they feel very well built. They all, again, follow the same design language, and as you can see, they look fairly similar. Only difference is size and obviously the optical elements. But with size also comes weight. So let me go ahead and pull out my weight scale and let's go ahead and compare these lenses. Okay, so I have my weight scale. I have none of the lens caps on the lenses, but I do have the rear caps. The rear caps weigh the same on all of them, so it should not impact the weight. And we're actually going to start off with the newest lens, the Summicron SL. Let's go ahead and put it on the weight scale. And this lens is going to go ahead and weigh 382 grams. It is the lightest of the bunch. What's good about this lens is it's lightweight, but still feels very well built. 382 grams. Moving on to the Apo, 700 grams even. So a little under double the weight of the Summicron SL. The Apo F2 is definitely heavier, you could feel it, but it also makes it feel a little bit better built, if that makes any sense. The weight makes it feel like a more expensive lens. It might be in my mind, but you can definitely feel the extra added weight. And this Summilux SL is just freaking massive. Let's go ahead and throw it on the weight scale. 1,109 grams. So you essentially go from the Summicron to the Apo, a little bit under double the weight. And from the Apo to the Summilux, a little bit more under double the weight, but almost double the weight. And you can definitely feel the difference. And when you have it in your bag, you can feel the difference. So as far as weight and ergonomics go, I will say that my favorite out of the bunch is the new Summicron SL. This lens is a joy to use. It is not heavy. And to me, when you have a lens that's lightweight, you want to take it with you to more places. When you're traveling, when you're going out and about. So the weight factor is a huge selling point for me. And I'm a huge fan of the build quality and the weight of the new Summicron SL. With that said, I think in this part of the comparison, the Summilux SL takes a huge loss. This lens is massive. It is heavy. And to be honest, it's one of those lenses that weighs so much that you only want to take it out when you're really kind of doing professional gigs, right? So if you're doing a wedding or you're doing a paid job, when weight doesn't matter because you're trying to deliver the best results possible, this lens is going to be it. But if you're doing something more for fun, or if you're doing something where you're going to go on a hike or you're going to have your gear on you for longer periods of time, I don't see myself taking this lens with me because this weight does add up. And in the end, the Apple kind of splits the difference. You have kind of the middle of the road as far as size and weight. And again, it splits the difference, so not necessarily a bad thing. But here, I think for me, in the size and weight department, the Summicron SL definitely takes the W. Well, what about autofocusing? Let's go ahead and talk about that. So for autofocusing, the accuracy is going to be the same across the board. When these lenses focus, they are very, very accurate. I haven't had a single problem with accuracy using any of these lenses. Speed, though, is very different. It might be a shock if you're new to Leica, if you're watching this video. If you've done your research, this should kind of line up with what you've seen and read. But we'll start off with the slowest autofocusing lens out of the bunch. It's going to be the Summilux SL. Of course, this lens is the biggest, which means it has the most glass to move, and it is by far the slowest. If you're doing portrait sessions, it's going to be okay. Again, you're going to see the difference, you're going to feel the difference, but it's not a big enough difference where you're going to miss the shot. As a matter of fact, I did a couple sessions with this lens, and even for walking shots towards the camera, I was surprised that this lens kept up. While I was shooting the session, I'm not going to lie to you, I thought I was probably missing half the shots. So when I was reviewing, I was actually quite surprised when most of the shots were in focus. But you do feel how slow this lens is. It's not quick and it's not snappy. With that said though, portrait sessions, weddings, anything a 51.4 is used for, it should be fine. Obviously, don't use this lens for sports or if anybody's running towards you because there's no way it's going to keep up. Last place as far as speed goes in autofocusing. Second place will be the Leica Apo. So this lens doesn't feel fast and doesn't feel slow. It's accurate, kind of down the middle here in this comparison. I was never left doubting the speed of this lens. Again, I never thought it was slow, kind of middle of the pack. And as a matter of fact, if I hadn't used any of these other lenses, I would be totally fine and happy with the speed of the Apo. It's never kind of let me down. I've used it for walking shots. I've used it for static subjects. It's been fine. But the thing is, other lenses do exist. And when you're using this new Leica Summicron SL, you realize that this Apo is on the slower side. This Summicron SL is extremely fast and snappy. The SL camera actually feels like a different camera when using this new lens lineup. So there's also a 35mm Summicron SL, and these lenses were designed for video. So they have different focusing motors, and again, it makes the camera feel snappier and faster. Even in low light, this lens feels snappy and fast, where in low light, these lenses do hunt a little more. So this budget Summicron SL, do not sleep on it. It is really, really good, and it feels so fast. Again, for this round of comparisons, the Summicron SL is going to win it for me. It is the fastest lens to focus, and it's very impressive. But to reiterate, accuracy, they are all the same. When they lock on, and you do get razor sharp focus. So here we're primarily talking about speed. So we've covered the size and weight. We've covered autofocusing. What about image quality? And this is the part of the test where it might be shocking to some, and to others, you might already know what you're going to expect. So I'm going to put these lenses to the side, and we're going to pull out my laptop, and we're going to take a look at some images. As a reminder, all these images are available to download in the link down below, so check them out and do your own comparison. But let me get my laptop out. Time out. Before I do that, I'm actually going to play some of the images that I shot with these lenses, edited, and see if you can take a guess before I do an in-depth comparison. After the slideshow, we'll come back and then we'll take a look at a comparison with just the raw photos so we can see the differences and compare. Let me play a slideshow. So what did you guys think? Could y'all tell any difference? Let's go ahead and take a deeper dive at the raw files and really kind of point out the differences between all these lenses. Now for all these photos, they were all shot with a tripod to match the same composition so we can take a look at all the minute differences between these lenses. Obviously, as you saw in the slideshow, they're not the most exciting photos. These are more for testing and seeing the differences between all lenses. Because Lightroom doesn't allow us to do 3 photos at once, we will be comparing them in batches of 2. Let's go ahead and stop talking and dig right in. So we're gonna start off with these 2 images here in front of us, and we're gonna start off comparing the Summicron lenses. On the left, we have the Summicron SL, and on the right, we have the Apo Summicron. These are the raw files, and again, same settings across the board, same white balance. So we'll start seeing some of the color differences, and also the light differences between these lenses. As you can see off the bat, the Apo is a brighter lens. Even though they're both shot at 1/320th of a second and ISO 100, the Apo is letting in more light. Zooming into the actual photos, you're gonna see here that the Apo is significantly sharper than the Summicron. As a matter of fact, when you look at the Summicron on its own, it's a sharp lens, but you don't realize how not sharp it is until you compare it to the Apo. The Apo just completely destroys the Summicron as far as detail. As a matter of fact, it makes the Leica SL2S, a 24 megapixel sensor, feel like a higher resolution sensor because of its resolving power. Here you can see all the little details in the model's skin versus on the regular Summicron, it's almost a little blurred out. For portraits, do you want that crazy sharpness? We'll answer that at the end of the video. But again, taking a look at these 2 images, the Apo is absolutely a sharper lens. What's interesting though is if you start taking a look at the actual edges of the frame and the bokeh, you're gonna notice some differences. So let me go ahead and zoom out. And you're gonna see that the actual Summicron has a little bit more blur than the Apo does. Let me go ahead and zoom in to about 100% here. And you're gonna see how the Summicron just has more blur across the image. Interesting because they're both shot at f2, and also it's more interesting because the Apo lets in more light, but the bokeh is definitely blurrier and creamier on the regular Summicron. So between these 2 lenses, the Apo is sharper, brighter, but I think the Summicron has more pleasing bokeh and out of focus areas. With that said, let's take a look at how these 2 compare with the Summilux SL. So here we have the Summicron SL on the left and the Summilux SL on the right at f2.0. And zooming in, we're gonna notice that the Summilux SL, let's actually zoom in a little bit more, let's zoom into 150%. The Summilux SL at 2.0 is also sharper than the Summicron by quite a bit. Just like the Apo, it looks like it's resolving more details in the skin, and overall it's a sharper image. Looking at the out of focus areas, the Summilux looks a little bit blurrier than the actual Summicron. So you are getting better bokeh on the Summilux than you are on the Summicron. So between these 2 lenses, the Summilux just wins it. Better out of focus areas, sharper, and it also looks to be a hair brighter than the Summicron. Let's see how the Summilux compares to the Apo now, both at f2. So here now we have the Apo on the left and the Summilux SL on the right, both at f2. Let's go ahead and zoom in, and we're gonna see that the sharpness is actually very similar. Let's go ahead and zoom into 150%, and we're gonna see that the sharpness is similar, but the Apo is definitely sharper. You might not see this on YouTube, so download these images. The Apo is producing more detail in the skin than the Summilux, but it's a super close battle here. I think you're really splitting the hairs when both are shot at f2. Now looking at the out of focus areas, the Summilux does have better bokeh. So in this scenario, the sharpness is really, really close. So I'm gonna say that the Summilux at f2 does produce a nicer result. You get more blur, you get almost equal sharpness. So you're getting kind of the best of both worlds. What about the Summilux at f1.4? Let's take a look at that. So here we have the Apo on the left and the Summilux on the right, this time at 1.4. And off the bat, you can see how there's a lot more blur with 1.4. So let's go ahead and zoom in. And at 150%, you're going to see that the Summilux at 1.4 is still a very sharp lens, but here the Apo now just really takes over in the sharpness department. The Summilux SL at 1.4 is still sharper than the Summicron, which you'll see here in a second, but the Apo just takes the cake wide open. But the background blur is where you really kind of notice the difference here, and shooting at 1.4, obviously letting in more light, and that background blur, if you want to go for that look, it's hard to beat the Summilux at 1.4. Now let's take a look at the Summilux at 1.4 and the Summicron at 2.0. So here we have the Summicron SL on the left and the Summilux on the right at 1.4. Again, you're going to notice that the Summilux has better background blur. Surprising though that 1.4 doesn't look as drastic as you would think comparing it to 2.0. That goes across this lens and the Apo. But zooming in, you're going to see that even the Summilux being at 1.4 is still sharper than the Summicron at f2, but not by much. So interesting comparison here because the Summicron, it's funny, when you compare the Summicron SL to any non-Apo lens, it looks sharp. It's not until you compare it to an Apo lens where you realize it's not as sharp as we think it is. Interesting fight. Summilux definitely wins it, but not by much in the sharpness department. In the blur department, again, blurrier, creamier bokeh, but up to you if you think it's drastic enough to justify, 4 times the weight and almost 3 times the price. And that's where you start really getting into what's better. But let's take a look at another set of images. And I do have to say, I also shot these lenses at 2.8, and I am including those image samples for you to download and play with. I want to keep this video into a manageable length, so I'm not going to go through all the sample images, but they will be included down below like I mentioned. At 2.8, I didn't notice that much of a change between the images, but I'll let you conclude with that. Anyways, we'll go on to the next set of images and then we'll wrap up our thoughts. So here on the left, we have the Summicron SL. On the right, we have the Apo Summicron. Again, both settings are the exact same. And in this example, I actually shot this at a parking lot. We were done taking photos, but then I saw the sun back there. And I wanted to see if either of these lenses were going to flare or how they would handle the actual sun. So we took these photos. And off the bat, you're going to notice there's also a difference in color. So here on the Apo, like I mentioned, same settings, the Apo just renders more magenta skin tones. The Summicron on the left looks greener, and the Apo is brighter and more magenta leaning. Stuff you can definitely correct in post, but when you have the same settings, you see the differences. The Apo has more pleasing skin tones on this example here with this white balance. But let's go ahead and zoom in to about 150%. And again, you're gonna notice the Apo is just ridiculously sharp. This is one of the sharpest lenses I've ever used. It out-resolves the 24 megapixel sensor on the SL2S. I actually wanna try this lens on the SL2 because with a higher megapixel sensor, I kind of wonder how much more sharpness you can get out of it because this is just insane. Looking at the background here, you're gonna notice a few things. The Summicron has better, rounder bokeh balls. I think they're more pleasing. I think they also look smoother and better. Now, the Apo being the Apo, you're gonna notice that there is no green or purple fringing in the background versus the Summicron. Some of these bokeh balls do have green fringing, and that's part of the Apo lens just being an apochromatic lens. But I think the bokeh looks better on the Summicron. I mean, even here in the far edge, the Summicron has rounder bokeh with green rings. Obviously, it's not an Apo lens, but the Apo lens has just more football-shaped bokeh across the entire image. The bokeh balls are not round whatsoever, even in the middle of the frame. That's the character of the lens, but definitely very, very different. I personally prefer the Summicron bokeh, rounder. I think it's more pleasing. That's gonna be for you to decide, and that really comes down to preference and style, but something that I noticed off the bat is the football-shaped bokeh on the Apo lens. Let's go ahead and compare now the Apo to the Summilux. So here we have the Apo on the left, Summilux on the right. And as you see in all three lenses, it really didn't flare. The sun is definitely back here. They both retain contrast. Not an extreme example, but the sun was definitely pointing at us, and all lenses did very, very well. Looking at sharpness, the Apo is sharper. The Summilux is holding its own at 2.0, that's for sure, but you can just see in the eyes how much sharper the Apo is. Looking at the background, very similar story. I like the bokeh better on the Summa Lux. I actually think the Apo has the worst bokeh out of all three lenses, and we'll talk more about that in my closing thoughts, but you can see here the Summa Lux has rounder bokeh and actually has almost no chromatic aberrations or green fringing like the Summicron. So let's go ahead and compare the Summa Lux to the Summicron now and see the differences. So here we have the Summicron on the right, Summa Lux on the left, and the color differences here are actually more similar than different. They both lean on the greener side, where the Apo leans more to the magenta side. And looking at the images, the Summa Lux is definitely sharper at 2.0. Looking at the bokeh balls, I think the Summa Lux has better bokeh, but surprisingly, this Summicron SL is holding its own. You're gonna see here that the Summa Lux SL, even though it's a non-Apo lens, doesn't have any green halo around the bokeh balls where the Summicron SL does. But looking at these two images, they're actually very, very similar. Now let's take a look at the Summa Lux at 1.4. So here we have the Summa Lux at 1.4 on the right, the Summicron on the left. Zooming in, you're gonna see that the Summa Lux is still sharper at 1.4, not by much, but definitely is a sharper lens. And the bokeh is just better. You get more football-shaped bokeh at 1.4, but it's definitely creamier and it just blows out the background a lot more. I have to say, I really expected the 1.4 difference to be a lot more than what we are seeing. Based on these images, I'm totally comfortable living with a 2.0 lens and just carrying less weight, but I'll save that again towards the end. Let's take a look at the Summa Lux at 1.4 against the Apo at 2.0. So here we have the Apo on the right, Summa Lux on the left. Obviously these are different settings because of the 1.4, but you see how bright the Apo is. Zooming in, you're gonna notice that the sharpness, of course, the Apo wins it. And in the bokeh department, the Summa Lux is definitely smoother and more pleasing to the eye in my opinion. And they actually share very similar bokeh balls, with the Summa Lux being wide open at 1.4. Like I said, and you can see here, I have over 30 images and we only went over 2 images, but you kind of get an idea of some of the differences. We can go on for an hour here. We're not gonna do that. So I'm gonna go ahead, like I mentioned, and wrap up my thoughts here. And don't forget, if you wanna look at samples at f2.8, they are included down below, so check those out. To me, it wasn't that much of a difference to actually go over them. So let me go ahead and go over my final thoughts. So for my final thoughts, is there a clear winner in this comparison? There actually isn't. I think what I found the most interesting in comparing these lenses is each lens has its own strengths and each lens truly has its spot in the lineup. So how would I break these down? If you want the sharpest lens out of the bunch, you want the sharpest 50mm, and all you care about is detail and resolving power, the clear winner here is the 50 Apo. This is one of the sharpest lenses I've used, and fun fact, I took the Apo on a trip with me and I actually had to change and adjust my preset as I was editing photos. I had to reduce contrast, I had to reduce some of the dehazing I use because this lens is that sharp. So it forced me to change my editing style. Some people are gonna ask, do you need the sharpest lens for portraits? And what I will say is this, you can always reduce sharpness in post. You can't add sharpness in post, at least not natural looking sharpness. So do you need the sharpest lens? It's up to you. I personally like having a sharp lens. Again, the Apo is a whole nother level of sharp, as you can see in the sample images. But I will give the Apo the crown for the sharpest 50mm. If you want the most versatility and just best all-round lens, I think the Summa Lux takes that crown. The Summa Lux has the best background blur, the best bokeh out of these 3 lenses. The Summa Lux also goes to f1.4, which means it lets in more light and gives you more flexibility when shooting in low light scenarios. The only con on the Summa Lux is the size and weight. It is a big and heavy lens, but that's the trade-off to get kind of the middle of the pack in sharpness, the best bokeh, and like I said, the most versatility, because when you stop this lens down to f2.0, it performs almost as sharp as the Apo. So you're really getting the sharpness, you're getting the creamy, dreamy bokeh, and you're getting the light of f1.4. So I will give the Summilux the best all-around 50mm here. Which then leads me to the Summicron SL. For the cheapest lens here out of the bunch, it definitely punches outside its weight class. So yes, you're not getting the sharpest 50 with the Summicron SL, but it's sharp enough. If you weren't comparing it to these two lenses, let me tell you, the sharpness is totally fine. The autofocusing on this lens is the fastest. This lens is also the lightest. So by having kind of the middle of the pack in image quality, but you're getting better autofocus speed. You're getting a lightweight lens, which you can take with you everywhere. It really kind of has its own spot in the lineup. Now, I didn't test these lenses for video. I strictly only did photos, but I guarantee you that the Summicron SL will just spank these other two lenses in the video department, so something to think about as well. But what do you guys think? This was a daunting comparison, and hopefully you download the images yourself so you can come up with your own thoughts. It was very fun, and it was also very nice seeing how each lens had its unique strengths and weaknesses. I was very surprised at how sharp the Apo lens was. I was very surprised at how bad the bokeh on the Apo was. And if you disagree with me, please let me know. I just did not like the bokeh on the Apo lens. And I was, again, very surprised at how well the Summicron SL lens, the newest one, performed. I knew and I had an idea that the Summilux SL was going to just kind of split the differences and truly be the best all-rounder. So that one didn't surprise me. But some of the other things I just mentioned definitely did. But guys, making a video like this is not cheap. Renting Leica lenses is not cheap. So this video is very expensive to make. So please give this video a like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. And I will see you on the next one. Have a good one, guys. Peace.